Indiana basketball goes on the road and lays another egg again. Welcome to IU Sports Sunday. I'm Nick Rodecap. We are approaching finals week here near the campus of Indiana University, Bloomington. And if I had to guess, I would say that if Indiana basketball was tested on playing road games, they would fail. And they would fail quite spectacularly. So we're going to rip the Band-Aid off and dive straight in to what exactly happened to Indiana in Lincoln on Friday night, because I was there. By the way, Pinnacle Bank Arena, fantastic arena, where Indiana men's basketball fell 85-68 to the Nebraska Cornhuskers. The Cornhuskers, who lost by 37 points to Michigan State 6 days before in their conference opener. They didn't look anything like the team that showed up at the Breslin Center 8 days ago. They looked like an efficient team scoring the basketball on Friday night. So we were there for WIUX Student Radio, which you can listen to on 99.1. We cover every single game. And by the way, that is quite the drive. I didn't think a 10-hour drive, honestly, I didn't think it would be that bad, but it was. It's about 650 miles from Bloomington to Nebraska, or to Lincoln, Nebraska, I should say. And we drove that whole way throughout the day on Friday, and then we called the game, stayed at a hotel, came back yesterday. But once we got to the arena, great arena, the all Nebraska's athletic facilities are kind of clustered around one section. They're a little bit more spread out than Assembly Hall, but the athletic facilities are very nice. The basketball team is too, based on how they played against Indiana on Friday night, 85-68, the final in that one. It was a really, really close game, honestly. Up until about the final 6 minutes. And that final 6 minutes was rough for Indiana. And, you could kind of sense that it was going to happen where the bottom would eventually fall out. Because, unfortunately, that's kind of been the reality for Indiana basketball under Mike Woodson, is that, they can put together some good sequences of maybe a half or maybe 24 minutes, but they can't put together a good 40 minutes. And at least in back-to-back games, because they did it against Minnesota at Assembly Hall on Monday. But it seems like every time Indiana men's basketball goes on the road or they play a good game, they follow it up with an absolute dud. And that was what happened. And honestly, it started early when Mackenzie Mbako picked up 2 fouls in about 31 seconds. Those kinds of things just can't happen because Mbako, he's averaging 15 a game, entering that one against Nebraska. And you need him on the floor. It's that simple. Nebraska has some guys who can create mismatches. They've got a 6'9" guy, Berke Buchtenjil, who can shoot from outside, but he's 6'9", so he can also play in the paint. And you need somebody like Mbako to match up against him. And when he picks up 2 fouls in 30 seconds, it's just not a recipe for success. He had to sit the entire first half. Mbako ended up playing 14 minutes in that game, only scored 2 points, had 5 rebounds, but also had 3 fouls. Just not a recipe for success. And Indiana, we kind of knew going into that game the Hoosiers would have to shoot the 3 ball, and they would have to attempt a lot of threes, because entering Friday night, Nebraska had ranked 8th in the country at forcing opponents to attempt threes. They were 8th in defensive 3 points attempted, which basically means, they force you to shoot a lot of three-pointers. Indiana ranked somewhere around 350th out of 364 teams when it came to attempting three-pointers on a per-game basis. So Nebraska, immovable object. Indiana, a stoppable force. And it went about as you would expect. Indiana shot 8 of 35 from 3. They attempted 65 total shots, 85 if you count their free throws, and they only scored 68 points. 8 of 35 from 3. Miles Rice was 1 for 4. Trey Galloway, for some reason, took 9 3-point attempts, which should never happen. In the year of our Lord 2024, Trey Galloway should not be taking 9 3-point shots, but he did on Friday when the Hoosiers fell 85-68 to Nebraska in Lincoln. And Luke Goody, 3 of 10. Bryson Tucker, 1 of 5. Kanan Carlisle, 0 for 5. I mean, the numbers they're horrible. And it seems like no matter the players on the roster, the results stay the same. Because you think about, I guess Nebraska just has Indiana's number. I guess Fred Hoiberg just owns Mike Woodson when it comes to this, because Nebraska's now won 4 in a row. Indiana hasn't beaten Nebraska since, I believe it was January 2022. And that was before Rob Phinisee hit the game winner to beat Purdue in Assembly Hall. That's how long ago that was. Nebraska just seems to run Indiana off the floor every time they play as of late. But Indiana, shooting, what was it? Yeah, 22.8% from three. They went 3 for 20 in the second half. Nebraska attempted 14 threes and made 8. Indiana attempted 35 and made 8. And there were multiple air balls there as well. I was there, again, broadcasting the game for WIUX Sports alongside Alex Hines. He and we did the game, and I vividly remember multiple air balls. I know that the stat sheet doesn't track it, but there were multiple air balls. Trey Galloway had one. Miles Rice had one. It looked like me. I said this on the broadcast. It looked like me putting up shots inside the Hyper building, inside Bill Garrett Fieldhouse on 7th Street, just chucking shots up and seeing what sticks, and nothing did. Indiana outscored 41-27 in the second half of that game. It was just bad late. I mean, they did not make a field goal in the final 7 minutes. And, it wasn't like they didn't have chances. They actually won the turnover margin, Indiana did. They won it. Nebraska had 14 turnovers. Indiana had 9. They also dominated on the offensive glass, 15-6, the advantage over Nebraska on offensive rebounds. But just there were multiple possessions where Indiana had 2 or even 3 chances to get a good shot up, and they just couldn't do it. And at some point, I do think that, you've got like a $5 million roster there if you're Mike Woodson and Indiana basketball. You've got all the talent in the world on paper. And everybody kind of, they recognize that going into this season. And that's why Indiana was picked by some to win the Big Ten, if not to finish in the top 4, then to win the whole conference. And they've got the pieces, but they cannot play as a cohesive unit consistently. And look, I get it. Like, it's early in the season, whatever. But at some point, those excuses have to stop. Because at this point, I don't really think we are early in the season. Indiana's 11 games in now, and of course, you play 31. You do the math, we're a little over a third of the way home. And Indiana, it doesn't help them that they, for instance, they backed out of the Crossroads Classic, which Purdue played against Texas A&M yesterday, 2 top 20 teams. Purdue fell by 1 possession. You'd rather have that on your resume if you're Indiana than now 3 losses, all of which were away from home by an average of about 19 points. These losses aren't close. And that's, it'd be one thing if Indiana had a tough non-con to fall back on, but they just don't. They just don't. One of the reasons they backed out of the Crossroads Classic was so that they could schedule more recruit-friendly non-conference games. So coming up, if you're Indiana, after finals week, next Saturday, you've got Chattanooga, and then the next Sunday you have Winthrop. Not exactly needle movers in the non-con. And again, you've already played Miami of Ohio, Sam Houston. The 2 losses, of course, to Louisville and Gonzaga, Providence, UNC Greensboro, South Carolina, Eastern Illinois, and SIU Edwardsville. Not exactly a bunch of world beaters. And I part of me wonders what would happen if Indiana decided to adopt the Matt Painter approach to non-conference scheduling, but I think I know the answer. I think they would get run off the floor every single game because Matt Painter schedules very tough non-conference games for his Purdue basketball team. I mean, you think about this season, they played Marquette, they played Alabama, they played now Texas A&M, and, Marquette and Bama, both top 15 teams, both consensus, top teams in Division I basketball. And Purdue, they lost to Marquette, and that was ugly, yes, but they beat Alabama. They kept Texas A&M close, even though, Will Berg, 7'2", didn't do anything. But the thing about Matt Painter coach teams is that they're always going to compete. And with Mike Woodson right now, whenever they go on the road, you can pretty much just chalk it up as a 15-point loss. It's unfortunate, but that is the reality. We'll talk more about Indiana basketball when we come back. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, I'm Nick Rodecap, and we talked a little bit before the break about Indiana men's basketball and their struggles on the road, their struggles against Nebraska. Nebraska, a team that up until last year went on a 10-year drought in which they did not make the NCAA tournament, but every time they played against Indiana, they look like the greatest team of all time. And I know that if you subscribe to the Mike Woodson support train, then you might call me. You might say I need therapy. That's something I've seen thrown out there, is that people who think Mike Woodson should be canned need help. People that boo him need help. But I think that there's a very compelling case that Mike Woodson should not be back as Indiana men's basketball head coach next year. In this era of college basketball, where you've got a bunch of players who are one-year rentals basically, and you're recruiting your own guys to come back, you would think Indiana would be posed for a spot as a contender. And again, that was kind of what we thought would happen coming into this season. Was like, okay, Indiana didn't have a lot of pieces last year, but now they do. You think about Miles Rice, really good point guard. You think about Malik Renew coming back. You think about Mackenzie Mbako coming back, getting Umar Ballo to transfer from Arizona. Umar Ballo, who Woodson wanted to recruit to Indiana after he lit up Indiana when they played Arizona in the fall of 2022. Luke Goody coming over from Illinois, kind of that three-point specialist coming off the bench. You think about him kind of filling the role that Miller Kopp filled for Indiana when he came over from Northwestern. But it just hasn't happened. Indiana has all the talent in the world. And again, we were there, Nick Rodecap with you. I was on the call for WIUX Radio. You can listen to the highlights on my Twitter at Nick Rodecap, NickRodecap, of Indiana's 85-68 loss at Nebraska. You think about Indiana's talent. They've got all the talent in the world. And I was talking to Brandon Gaudin, the Fox Sports broadcaster who did play-by-play for Friday's game, and he told me, he'll be at Assembly Hall for a couple games this year. And I said, well, hopefully Indiana plays better than they did today. He said, yeah, they got to figure it out. And, he's right. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to make that observation, but to hear that from somebody else outside the Indiana student media sphere was refreshing, because it tells me that, this is something that, everybody's searching for answers at this point, and nobody has them. You look at what Indiana did in the second half against Nebraska. That was a 3-point game at halftime, and they ended up losing by 17. That doesn't happen entirely because Nebraska is just, shooting lights out. Indiana shot 35% from the floor and 23% from three against Nebraska yesterday on Friday night. Nebraska, on the other hand, shot 58% from the floor and 43% from three. Nebraska and Indiana made the same amount of three-point baskets. Indiana attempted 21 more than Nebraska did, and both teams made 8. That is bad. Again, I said it before the break. That should not happen. There were multiple air balls in that game. And yeah, it's just, at some point, if the players change but the results stay the same, then you go to the next common denominator, which is the coaching. And I saw Dane Fife put out a tweet yesterday. He was watching the Texas A&M Purdue game, which I was listening to driving back from Lincoln, Nebraska here to Bloomington. And it sounded like a really good game. And Dane Fife said it was a hard-fought game between two well-coached and competitive teams. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but basically he said that Purdue and Texas A&M were both well-coached and the game was competitive as a result of that. Of course, Dane Fife was on Mike Woodson's staff until he was basically forced out because they didn't see eye to eye. And you just kind of, you put your fingers on your chin, you think, interesting. Interesting that Dane Fife would say that after Indiana lays an egg at Nebraska and Purdue and Texas A&M go down to the wire against each other. That's just something to think about. And Also, I mean, let's look at what players who left Indiana are doing at other schools. Tamar Bates at Missouri just helped the Tigers knock off Kansas. He dropped like 25 points against the Jayhawks. And you look at C.J. Gunn, scored 20 points for DePaul yesterday. DePaul is like 9-3, I think. Let's take a look. Because I feel like they're better than 9-3, and I want to give them credit where credit is due. But you remember C.J. Gunn at Indiana, very different. Very different compared to what he is doing at DePaul. And sometimes, it's not a good fit. And that's just how it is. But let's look. DePaul, the Blue Demons, yesterday against Wichita State. C.J. Gunn in that game. First of all, DePaul scored 91 points. Holy cow. C.J. Gunn, 22 points off the bench. 4 of 6 from 3 in just 14 minutes off the bench for C.J. Gunn yesterday. As DePaul took down Wichita State. The Blue Demons now 8-2. C.J. Gunn balling out for them, which is really good to see. I mean, he's from Indianapolis. I'm from Indianapolis. I always want to see people from Indianapolis succeed. C.J. Gunn shooting 35% from 3 this season, averaging 9.9 points per game. He did not have that kind of production at Indiana. Remember Caleb Banks? Caleb Banks, the former Indiana forward who didn't play a lot at Indiana, and when he did, he was not that great. For Tulane yesterday, they lost to Florida State. Tulane is 5-7 this year, but Caleb Banks, 33 points and 16 boards on 55% shooting. So, again, some of those guys that you think maybe were not as good as, the Miles Rices, the Mackenzie Mbakos of the world, they're getting things done at other schools. And again, I go back to Tamar Bates as well. Tamar Bates played a couple years at Indiana. But Bates had 29 when Missouri beat Kansas by 9. That kind of thing didn't happen for him when he was playing for Mike Woodson. I'm not saying that all 3 of those players were held back by Mike Woodson. There's no possible way to know that for sure. But when they go to other schools and produce like they have, it's really interesting to think about, okay, maybe Mike Woodson is the problem. And, I feel bad because I feel bad for his legacy, if it makes sense, because of what he did as a player. One of the greatest players in Indiana men's basketball history, Mike Woodson. But you've got to separate the player and the coach. The coach is not good. And I do think that Indiana might have to make a change after this year. I know that they were never going to fire him after last season, but they could have had Dusty May. Dusty May, who won up at Wisconsin, something that Indiana has not done since 1998. 5 years before I was even born. That's how long it's been since Indiana's won at Wisconsin. That's crazy to think about. But Dusty May took Michigan up there and upset the Badgers at the Kohl Center at the first time of asking for him as the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines. By the way, they're off to a good start this season. Just would have been really interesting to see if Indiana made a push for him, but now I don't think he's going anywhere. So the Hoosiers, again, 85-68. Losers at Nebraska. They've got a week off because it's finals week here at IU. They will host Chattanooga at noon. And then they've got another week off after that. And they'll play Winthrop on the 29th. I am really looking forward to the same old discourse about attendance, about the fan base being entitled, about whatever it is when Indiana plays Chattanooga. Again, if Indiana played tougher non-conference games, maybe attendance wouldn't be an issue. Or maybe if Indiana played well on a consistent basis, attendance wouldn't be an issue. Because, especially right now, I don't feel like anybody should pay their hard-earned money to see Indiana men's basketball if they're just going to play like they did against Nebraska, or they're going to play like they did against Louisville, or they're going to play like they did against Gonzaga anytime they face a decent team. Like, yes, Indiana played well against Minnesota. They won 82-67 on Monday. But Minnesota's not good. Minnesota's picked to finish near the bottom of the Big Ten. They basically have nobody because all their good players left and went to schools where they can make more money in NIL. The only one who came back was Dawson Garcia. And you can't be a one-man show if you're Dawson Garcia at the University of Minnesota. And yeah, the South Carolina game was supposed to be a marquee game, but South Carolina's not actually that good this season. So I don't like how everybody's like, oh, the fan base needs to come out and support Indiana men's basketball. Maybe Indiana shouldn't lay an egg every time they go away from home, because after this next stretch, Indiana is going to be away from home a lot. A lot. After they play Rutgers, they go to Penn State, they go to Iowa City, they go to Columbus, Ohio, they go to Evanston, Illinois, and they go to West Lafayette. That's 5 huge road games, all just in the month of January. And then they go to the Kohl Center, by the way. They face Wisconsin on February 4th. Again, they haven't won at Wisconsin since 1998. Then they go to Michigan State. They go to East Lansing on February 11th. Michigan State's a tough team as well. They beat Nebraska by 37. They had no problem handling Nebraska. Big part of that was because they dominated on the glass, out-rebounding Nebraska by almost 30. Michigan State also shot lights out. Indiana did not shoot lights out, 18% from 3, and they lost by 17. So the talent changes, the coaching stays the same. At some point, something's got to give. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you on a gloomy Sunday morning in Bloomington. Not sunny like it was last week. And we'll close this discussion about Indiana men's basketball by looking at maybe, I don't know, some of the positives, if there were any, on Friday when Indiana fell by 17 to Nebraska at Pinnacle Bank Arena. Quite the atmosphere out there in Lincoln. I was there calling the game for WIUX Sports. Again, you can listen to those highlights at Nick Rotacap on Twitter, NickRodecap. I don't know if we're still calling it Twitter. I am, colloquially anyway. It will never be X to me. It just doesn't sound right. Neither does what happened in Indiana. They were down 3 at half, and I remember saying on the broadcast on WIUX Sports, this game might be headed to overtime, because for the first 10 minutes or so of the second half, that's what it felt like. It felt like it was going to be a slugfest that went all the way down to the wire, and it did not. One of the bright spots, though, from that game was Miles Rice, and he was kind of just Indiana's only real positive on offense in the second half of that game, when Indiana scored just 27 points in the second half of their loss to Nebraska. But Rice was blazing for Indiana in that second half. He had 4 straight field goals. He looked really confident. He looked like he was trying to just kind of take the game over and will Indiana to a win. Unfortunately, it didn't work. But Rice had 20 points, 3 rebounds, and an assist. He also turned the ball over 3 times, but he had 4 steals. He was really just kind of a pest for Nebraska, leading Indiana, all scorers with 20 points. No other Indiana player had more than 12. Rice, 20 points, 3 boards, 4 steals, and an assist. If Rice plays like that every night, Indiana should have a chance. Should have a chance. Because, again, 8 for 35 from 3. Yikes. But Rice playing like that shows why Mike Woodson got him out of the transfer portal, because he is very, very talented at the point guard position. Now, there are some questionable passes that he makes, sure, but I feel like you'll take the bad with a lot of the good that Miles Rice gives you. He can shoot off the bounce. He's really confident driving to the basket. At least he was in Lincoln on Friday from what we saw out there. But unfortunately for him, he just didn't really have a lot of help. And some of that comes from Mackenzie Mbako. Again, he played 31 seconds in the first half because he picked up 2 fouls basically right after the tip on back-to-back possessions. And those kinds of things, just you cannot win very easily like that. But somebody's got to step up. Somebody's got to make plays off the bench. That's what Connor Essegian did for Nebraska. Essegian, coming off the bench, had 28 minutes, went 4 of 7 from the floor, and scored 13 off the bench. Andrew Morgan in 18 minutes off the bench scored 10 points. Did Andrew Morgan. The big man for Nebraska, Aaron Eulis, made a big 3 for the Huskers as well, coming off the bench. It's not like it's unheard of that you need depth to win in the Big Ten. I don't know if that's not exactly like a crazy discovery. But I'd like to point out Connor Essegian is from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I don't know if he was recruited by Indiana out of high school. But he certainly could have been recruited out of the portal. Because, you think if you say the best players from Indiana play at Indiana, Connor Essegian should have been on your list. Because it's not like he was an unknown commodity. He went to Nebraska from Wisconsin. But he was big for Nebraska. He was a big catalyst for them when they ultimately ran away with that game in the second half. But Essegian from Fort Wayne, Indiana, kind of a consensus 4-star, 3-star, 4-star out of high school. Again, he initially went to Wisconsin, and Indiana did not even offer him out of high school. So just food for thought. You look at what Purdue has done. A lot of their talent comes from the state of Indiana. So I wonder. I just wonder. That's all. But we'll leave it there. Indiana has a lot of things to answer for on the hardwood. And they don't have a lot of time to figure it out because, again, Big Ten Conference play begins in earnest in the new year. Indiana's got 2 more games before then. And then they go to Penn State, and we'll see what this team is really made of. But so far, the signs are not encouraging. Can't win away from home. Can't even compete away from home, and that's just not good. But we'll leave it there. And we'll shift gears now to the college football playoff. Of course, the Heisman Trophy ceremony was last night. Travis Hunter wins it over Ashton Jeanty, the smallest margin since 2009. I feel like Ashton Jeanty was robbed. I feel like everybody who with a brain knows that Ashton Jeanty was robbed. Travis Hunter winning the Heisman. I thought Jeanty deserved it much more, but that is what's done is done. So Indiana football now, by the way, Curtis Rourke was a top 10 Heisman finalist, which is insane and awesome and very cool. Hoosiers visit South Bend on Friday. Friday night, the lone game on Friday, as far as the college football playoff is concerned. It's a very interesting matchup because obviously we remember Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois in week 2 of the season. They lost 16-14. That loss was more and more puzzling every single week, just because it became apparent that Northern Illinois is not actually that good, which makes their win over Notre Dame one that they got $1.2 million for from the University of Notre Dame. Just a little bit puzzling. But that was well in the past. That was back in September. Notre Dame has gotten a lot better since they lost to Northern Illinois. They have not lost again since that loss to the Huskies. The Irish 11-1 on the season, the 7th seed in the college football playoff. They're a really interesting team because you think about a team like Georgia Tech. They've got a quarterback in Haynes King who is a dual threat quarterback and almost more of a running back behind center than he is a quarterback. Notre Dame quarterback Riley Leonard is very similar. Leonard only 2,092 passing yards. That's it. But he's got 721 on the ground. And Leonard, 16 passing touchdowns, 14 rushing touchdowns, which is second to only the electric Jeremiah Love. Notre Dame's running back who's got 950 yards on the ground. He's got over 1,100 yards from scrimmage, and he's got 15 rushing touchdowns. Indiana hasn't really faced a team like that of Notre Dame's caliber this year. I mean, you think about teams they've faced with dual-threat quarterbacks, Jack Lausch from Northwestern maybe? Lausch can make some plays with his legs, but he's not Riley Leonard caliber. Again, Riley Leonard, 721 rushing yards as a quarterback, second among all Notre Dame players. Notre Dame's offense is actually run first. They've attempted 326 passes, run the ball 428 times. It's a pretty even split as far as yards are concerned, and I'm interested to see how Indiana's defense handles that. Because you think about what Leonard can do with his legs. If Indiana decides to dial up some blitzes and Leonard sees it, there's going to be space for him to run if he can evade the blitz, which I believe he can. Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of standouts in the wide receiving game. They've got, guys like Bo Collins, Jaden Greathouse. They've combined for about 750 yards, but they don't really air the ball out a lot. So again, I'm really, really intrigued to see how Indiana handles it. Notre Dame has 8 players with double-digit receptions this season. So they've got a lot of guys to look out for. or 7 players, I should say. No, they've got 8. I'm intrigued to see how Indiana handles Notre Dame defensively this Friday in the college football playoff first round in South Bend. That's an 8 p.m. kick. I'll be there covering the game for the Hoosier Network. You can follow me at Nick Rotocap on Twitter. Probably be talking about Indiana football on Friday. I don't know. No cameras on the field, so not really much else I can do. But I'm really excited for that game. Got a lot of friends who are Notre Dame fans, some of whom either go to or went to IU. And to you reversible jacket folks, I say pick a side. Because I saw a lot of the Notre Dame fans on discussing this game. They're like, oh, Indiana football fans have to figure out which team to root for this weekend. Please shut up. They're like, oh, Indiana football fans are just now coming out of the woodwork after they've been in the basement for 100 years. Really? I had no idea Indiana football was historically bad. Please tell me more. Got to find a new bit. If you're a reversible jacket fan, if you're a Notre Dame football and Indiana basketball fan, then stay on that side. Root for Notre Dame. Because the Indiana football fans who have been following this team for a while, they deserve every single minute of this college football playoff run, even if it ends in South Bend in the first round. Curt Cignetti, the National Coach of the Year. Curtis Rourke, a top 10 Heisman vote getter. He got 2 first-place votes in the Heisman Trophy selection process, which is incredible for an Indiana football player in the year 2024. Never thought we would see that again, but by somehow it happened, and that is fantastic. We will talk more Indiana football and their upcoming matchup with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish coming up next here on IU Sports Sunday. Wrapping up this first hour here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you on the final Sunday of the fall semester in Indiana football. Just getting started in the college football playoff. They go to South Bend on Friday. And there's a lot of unknowns. We don't really know much about how this game might go because Indiana and Notre Dame both really, their schedules are weird. Their schedules have been very weird. Notre Dame went to Texas A&M in week 1, and they won by 10, yes. That was a very different Texas A&M team than the one that finished the season by losing to Texas. And, yeah, I know it's, not exactly shocking to find that teams change throughout the course of the year. But I really, you look at Notre Dame's resume, beat A&M by 10, obviously lost to Northern Illinois, blew out every bad opponent they played after that. Rock fight against USC at the end of the season, 49-35 over the Trojans in Los Angeles. 1-score win over Louisville. Keep in mind, Louisville lost to Stanford. But Notre Dame, 1-score win over the Cardinals. So, scheduling has not been great for either team. I'd say it does slightly favor Notre Dame. But I do wonder how they match up against a team like Indiana, a team that can beat you multiple different ways, can force turnovers as well as anybody, can get to the quarterback, and that's where I think Riley Leonard's legs come into play. Riley Leonard, the Notre Dame quarterback, 720 rushing yards and about 2,100 passing yards. Indiana hasn't faced a dual-threat quarterback like that this season. Leonard doesn't take a lot of sacks. He doesn't turn the ball over a lot. He scores a lot of touchdowns. He's got 30 total touchdowns this season. Very intriguing to see how that goes on Friday night in South Bend. And on the other side, you've got Indiana, of course. Both teams, Notre Dame and Indiana, are 11-1. Entering this one, I am very, very excited to see Indiana on this kind of stage. It's been a long time since we've seen Indiana football, getting any sort of national attention. Maybe 2020, yeah. But that was COVID. There were no fans. Indiana obviously played Tennessee in a bowl game with fans in attendance in early 2020. And I'd rather just not talk about that game against Tennessee. They were up 16 points and lost. That's all you need to know. Now, though, Indiana, led by Heisman vote-getter Curtis Rourke, who finished 9th in Heisman balloting. Rourke, 2,800 yards. He's averaging 9.9 yards per completion this season, 27 passing touchdowns to 4 picks. Sacks have been a problem for Curtis Rourke, And the Indiana offensive line as of late, you think back to prior to the Michigan game, when Indiana announced that starting left guard Drew Evans was out for the season with an Achilles injury. And Indiana's pass protection problems have been a little bit too glaring over the last couple of games. Of course, you think back to their loss against Ohio State. Rourke had nothing. He had no time to make any reads in that game because Ohio State keyed in on that silent count that they were using. Indiana never changed the silent count, so you had Ohio State players timing up the snap and jumping it every single time. Then even against Purdue on that first drive, Rourke took a sack and Indiana had to punt against Purdue. And, broken clock, right, twice a day, that kind of thing, but that's concerning. And I wonder, will Notre Dame go blitz heavy on Indiana? And if so, how will Indiana adjust? Because the offensive line has been sort of shaky lately. And Notre Dame fans, although they're not very loud, if they get going, it's going to be tough for the Hoosiers in South Bend, especially with ticket prices as high as they are. The prices have been dropping throughout the week, but it is still, you'd have to sell an arm and a leg to get into Notre Dame Stadium on Friday night. But if Indiana cleans up the pass protection, and I think the week off is going to help them, has helped them in that respect, just getting healthy, just getting right. I'd like to see them clean that up on Friday because they're going to need it. And if they have to run the ball, I'm not worried. Notre Dame's got some dudes up front though, and they have a very, very talented defense, very disciplined, very well coached. They don't fall for a lot of eye candy. And Indiana uses some eye candy. They use some end arounds. They use some misdirection in their offensive approach. I feel like this is like two runaway trains colliding, and something's got to give. Of course, Indiana on the ground between Justice Ellison and Ty's son, Lawton, about 1,450 yards and 22 touchdowns for Indiana. So Indiana is definitely a pass-first team. They've got over 1,000 more yards through the air than they do on the ground. Curtis Rourke, of course, he can air it out. He can sling it. And if he has time to sling it, that's going to be the key. That's going to be the key for Indiana going to South Bend. Give Curtis Rourke time to make decisions. Let him cook up something through the air. And we'll see what Indiana can do when they go to Notre Dame on Friday. That's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great way to cap off finals week. And that's another thing, we haven't seen this kind of thing before with a game of this magnitude being played so close to the end of the semester. I'd assume the players are taking their finals just like anybody else. But technically this game is being played right hours after finals week is over here at Indiana University Bloomington. Finals week begins tomorrow. I've got a couple on Wednesday. That'll be fun. But I wonder, how you balance that mentally as a player. I would not want to be in that situation because, finals are hard enough as it is. Now throw in the biggest college football game of your life, by the way, coming up on Friday night. If Indiana wins, they play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Georgia without quarterback Carson Beck, who hurt his UCL, the ligament in your elbow. A ligament in your elbow, I should say. A lot of baseball players suffer that injury, and it takes a long time to come back from. Brock Purdy sustained that injury, the 49ers quarterback. He was out for a while. So Georgia's going to go with Gunnar Stockton, who did not play that well against Texas, but largely got bailed out by the run game and the defense. It's going to be fun. You are listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rodecap with you as we approach the college football playoff beginning this Friday night. And it's the matchup that everybody had on their minds, of course. That's Indiana and Notre Dame. Indiana, famously a football powerhouse, as we know. But in all seriousness, Hoosiers and Notre Dame, ABC, 8 o'clock Friday. Sean McDonough going to be on the call, which I like. If I wasn't in the stadium, wouldn't mind listening to him call the game. I like how ESPN as a network has just been openly campaigning for SEC superiority when it's obvious that that's not the case anymore. The prime example that I'll point to, this was after the Big 12 championship game. Joe Tessitore did the game for ESPN, and he said, now we'll go to the heavyweight matchup between Texas and Georgia in the SEC title. Sir, you just did the Big 12 championship game. But sure, yeah, the SEC is way better. Then ESPN has repeatedly I don't know. I'm not even going to say it's like misrepresenting. I don't know what it is. But ESPN has repeatedly conflated Arizona and Arizona State. They made a tier list sort of thing of all the college football playoff teams and, what they like. It's like, contender, Cinderella, pesky, that kind of thing. They wanted to put Arizona State in the Cinderella tier, but they used the Arizona logo. And they're talking about, Cam Scadaboo has made a difference down in Tucson. Arizona State doesn't exist in Tucson. They're in Tempe, not Tucson. And it's Arizona State. It's not Arizona. It's very obvious that ESPN does not care. They don't care if it's not the SEC or if it's not a big brand. They ran a promo for Indiana football, and they showed footage of Tom Allen speaking to Indiana players from the 2019 season. Yeah. Now, of course, that season Indiana played an SEC team in a bowl game. So maybe that was why they had the footage and they just didn't pull anything else because they don't have anything else. But if you don't have anything newer than 2019, then what are you doing if you're ESPN? Because you could tell it was from 2019 because the Indiana players had the patch on their jersey celebrating 150 years of college football. And I remember those jerseys specifically because Indiana, is what they wore when they beat Purdue in double overtime. But yeah, I don't know. A part of me thinks that ESPN is mad they didn't get a slice of the Big Ten media deal. And that's why they're just doing this to slight the conference. But that doesn't explain Arizona State because ESPN has the Big 12 media contract. And they put Xavier Cincinnati on ESPN Plus yesterday, which was really funny. Men's basketball, that is. But as for football, Arizona State has a lot of bulletin board material from ESPN. And, the national talking heads who only care about the SEC and only care about the big brands. And those talking heads, a lot of them have Heisman votes, unfortunately, which is why Travis Hunter won the Heisman. It's because he plays for a big brand in Colorado. Even though Ashton Jeanty was by far the fan favorite. But Hunter won the Heisman, which sucks for Ashton Jeanty. But again, Hunter is not in the playoff. Ashton Jeanty is. Jeanty will be on the bigger stage. Both Arizona State and Boise State have first-round byes, which is interesting as far as the college football playoff is concerned. Arizona State in the Peach Bowl will get the winner of Clemson, Texas. That game at 4 o'clock on Saturday. Clemson, the 12 seed, only getting in because they beat SMU in the ACC championship. Texas losing to Georgia. There was an interception late in the SEC title game, and a Texas defender was celebrating instead of throwing a block on the one Georgia player that was in the vicinity. He throws a block. Texas probably takes that back to the house and wins the game. But they didn't, so now they've got to play a first-round game against Clemson. If they win, they'll take on Arizona State. Further down the bracket, SMU, Penn State. That's a noon kick because for some reason Penn State is just destined to play noon games at home every single time. Really weird. That's the 6-11 game. Penn State, the 6th seed. SMU, the 11th seed. The winner plays Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. I don't know. I don't know about James Franklin in big games. He's historically not very good in big games. SMU obviously not really seen as the better team, but they also don't have a coach who's notorious for losing in big games. Just food for thought. And then, of course, Indiana, Notre Dame. The winner gets Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And Notre Dame favored by 7.5, which, if Indiana hadn't played like complete garbage against Ohio State, I would say that's disrespectful. But Indiana was on a huge stage one time and they completely imploded. So I understand where that comes from. I also understand that Notre Dame is very, very good on the ground. They've got a very tough front seven, and Indiana's offensive line is not good right now. So Indiana's got to clean it up. And again, I think that extra week off is going to help them when it comes to protecting Curtis Rourke and getting some run lanes open for Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton on Friday night. But man, what a time. What a time to be in Bloomington where people care more about football than they do about basketball, and football is still playing meaningful games in late December. Going to be very fun. I hope just for the sake of the 12-team playoff that all these first-round games are close because from an entertainment standpoint, that is obviously the best outcome. You've got some people pushing for the playoff to be expanded to 16 or 24 teams. It kind of feels inevitable, especially because the SEC feels like they got slighted. Which to that argument, I say, if you feel like you got screwed because, like Alabama should have been in or South Carolina should have been in, or if you're the ACC, Miami should have been in, win the games you're supposed to win. That's what Indiana did. That's why Indiana's in the playoff. Alabama, as the number one team in the nation, lost to Vanderbilt. Alabama did not score a touchdown against 6-6 Oklahoma. And South Carolina lost to Alabama. It's just those kinds of things. It's tough because you think about the way that ESPN kind of controls the messaging and the narratives around college football. They choose what to talk about. They choose what to spotlight. And, when you have people like Heather Dinich, who graduated from IU, by the way, openly dumping on Indiana at every opportunity, then, of course, people around the country are going to think like that because that's what ESPN is telling them. And ESPN is this massive, massive brand. So people are going to listen to what ESPN has to say about the different conferences and those teams in college football. And they've created this, like, again, Joe Tessitore calling the Big 12 championship game says, okay, now we're going to go to the heavyweight matchup. Dude, at least pretend like you're interested. It's kind of like the NBA talking about the NBA Cup, the in-season tournament over there. And in their league website preview of the Oklahoma City Thunder against the Houston Rockets, the semifinal, the NBA says, well, it might not have been the matchup that we were looking for. And they wonder why ratings are down. They hate their own product. That's not a recipe for success. College football, ESPN's kind of doing the same thing. They hate their own product. Oh, look at this amazing story in Indiana. A first-year head coach turning the program around, winning 11 games for the first time in program history. Well, bad news. You're supposed to be bad, so we're going to dunk on you. What about Texas? Huh? Texas' resume very similar to Indiana. They didn't have a ranked win until the final week of the season. Texas. Well, Michigan was ranked at the time, but Michigan being ranked was stupid. It makes me ill the way the messaging is between conferences. Okay, Texas, yes, technically they beat Michigan. Michigan was ranked when they played. Technically they beat Oklahoma. Oklahoma was also terrible. Yes, they beat Vanderbilt. That was by 3. Texas' resume is predicated a lot on preseason rankings, which is why I think preseason rankings need to go away. Because when Texas played Michigan in week 2, Michigan was the number 10 team in the country. Even though it was obvious to everyone before the season even started that Michigan was going to have a crisis on offense. Oklahoma was ranked 18th when Texas played them in the Red River rivalry game. Oklahoma was horrible. Texas then hosted Georgia and lost by 15. Vanderbilt was only ranked because they beat Bama. They never had any expectations, and ultimately Vanderbilt came back down to earth. The only real win that I would say Texas has is Texas A&M. But Texas the 5 seed. Everyone's like, oh, they're in the SEC, so yeah. If the SEC is so big and bad, then how did Texas leave the Big 12 and play for the title in their first season? It just doesn't make sense because I thought the SEC was so much better than everyone else. Here's a thought, and I said this before. I'll say it again. If the SEC is so big and bad, if you want to be so tough, if you're obviously so much better than everyone else in college football, stop playing cupcakes in November. Maybe if the SEC had 9 conference games and Alabama didn't play Mercer in November, Bama could have found a way into the playoff. But they played Mercer in November. Tennessee played UTEP in November. It's one thing if it's a bye game in August. I get that. Everybody does that. But in November, Tennessee played UTEP. Georgia played UMass, and UMass scored 3 touchdowns on them, by the way. Everybody in the SEC is beatable. Everyone in the SEC can be beat. Georgia can be beat. Texas can be beat. Tennessee can also be beaten. But I don't trust Ryan Day when Ohio State hosts Tennessee at the Shoe on Saturday night. Man, that's going to be fun. Whole college football playoff is going to be fun. This is what we've waited for all season long. Just got to play the games. Can't wait. Coming up this weekend. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. Thinking about the college football playoff. And, there might be an argument for expansion again in the future. And, honestly, if we're going to expand the playoff again, let's just make it like the NCAA tournament. Let's just make it 68 teams. Because I think that's what the SEC powers want. They want every SEC team in the playoff. Even if it's 6-6 Oklahoma or 2-10 Mississippi State. Put them in the playoff. Think about all the 5-star recruits they have. They would win in a hypothetical game. Not the real game, maybe. But they'll win the hypothetical, and that's all that matters. So let's go 64 teams in the playoff, all of the SEC teams in there. I'm obviously joking, but somebody's going to push for something like that. And it's going to be really funny when they do. But as it stands, we've got 12 teams playing for a chance at a national title. One of those is Indiana, which is still very crazy to me. So I want to talk quickly about Notre Dame and their the way they win football games. The way they do it is by scoring a ton of points and running the ball until your defense just falls off the field, basically. Riley Leonard can throw the football, but that's not really his forte. He's a dual threat. So Indiana's going to have to control him, going to have to keep him from getting outside the pocket, or if they do, they're going to have to be very disciplined. Otherwise, Leonard might have a field day. Notre Dame's defense is tough up front. Their secondary is a little weak, and again, that's where if Curtis Rourke has time to throw the football, I think that's a good thing for Indiana. Notre Dame's special teams, particularly their kicking game, bad. They've missed 10 field goals this year, only made 8. That's less than 50%, which is not good. Their main man, Matthew Jeter, is 6 of 12 kicking field goals. So you might expect Notre Dame to go for it on fourth down if they're on the edge of field goal range. Curt Cignetti does the same thing quite a bit. So you might see some of those plays taking a gamble, 4th and 5, 4th and 6 near midfield. On the other side, on the plus side of midfield, whereas other teams might kick it, Notre Dame might go for it. Something to keep an eye on. If it comes down to a special teams game, I would take Indiana because Nicholas Radicic has been as close to automatic. We'll take a look at the preliminary forecast, I say, because it's still 5 days away and a lot can change. But up in South Bend, looking at the weather for Friday, there is a chance for snow, actually, throughout the day. High temperature of 33, low of 27. Kickoff, it'll be around 30 degrees, which after Indiana played Purdue, that's going to feel like summer. Tell you what, I was on the field for that game covering it for the Hoosier Network, and it was quite the experience. It was only after I put on about 7 layers that it wasn't freezing cold. Obviously, the players can't wear that much clothing. So I think if it's a very, very cold weather game, I think that favors Indiana a little bit. Obviously, Notre Dame, no strangers to the cold. They'll be able to practice in it all week. But Indiana put up 66 points on Purdue in a snow globe. So that's an encouraging sign. Notre Dame also put up 66 on Purdue. It was not in a snow globe, but it was still against the Boilermakers, who lost top safety Dylan Thieneman to Oregon in the transfer portal. Thought maybe there might be an outside chance of him coming back with new head coach Barry Odom up in West Lafayette, but Thieneman will join the Oregon Ducks, and Indiana goes to Oregon next season. The 2025 schedule for Indiana is out. It's tougher than this year, which again is not really that hard. Indiana's schedule this year was very soft relative to what they could have gotten. But next year, we look ahead. Indiana's 3 non-conference schedules, not exactly world beaters. 3 non-conference games. Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State. Old Dominion, I will be honest, I know nothing about. Haven't heard a lot about them. We'll take a quick look at what they did this year. Judging by the fact I didn't hear a lot about them, it probably wasn't much. But ODU will come to Bloomington on August 30th. And they, this past season, again, 5-7, 4-4 in league play. They are in the Sun Belt, so they faced James Madison and only lost by 3. That could be fun. A couple close losses, lots of close losses, actually. But that should be a game Indiana wins going away. They only lost to South Carolina by 4, though. That's interesting. Kennesaw State just made the jump to the FBS, and they fired their head coach, who then showed up to greet the players at their next game because that's how much he cares about the program, which is interesting. That they fired him because he was the one that led them from FCS to FBS, and then they kicked him to the curb when they realized that they weren't getting the results they wanted, but moving from FCS to FBS is really hard. So he probably didn't get a fair shake there. Then Indiana State comes to town. That's a game that Indiana has played off and on for years. Indiana State is horrible. Then you get into Big Ten play for Indiana football next season in 2025. The home games, Illinois, Michigan State, UCLA, Wisconsin for Big Ten play. Indiana and Illinois always seem to play each other close. So that'll be fun. Michigan State, Old Brass Spittoon earlier next year, October 18th. UCLA comes to town. Tino Sunseri, of course, Indiana's quarterbacks coach, will be UCLA's offensive coordinator next season. He will join them after Indiana bows out in the college football playoff, or Indiana wins the Natty, because there is a chance. All they need is a shot. But Tino Sunseri will be the OC for UCLA when the Bruins come to town next October. And then Wisconsin, a tough team. Luke Fickell coaching them. An interesting team. They didn't really have a quarterback this year. So I'll be intrigued to see what happens when the Badgers come into Bloomington. The road games, though, are really what I'm focused on for Indiana. In conference play, you go to Iowa and Oregon back-to-back. There is a bye week in there. But Indiana goes to Iowa, goes to Oregon, to Maryland, Penn State, and Purdue. Whew. Man. We're going to see what Indiana's made of next year. Their roster is going to look very different. A lot of guys one and done this year. Curtis Rourke, Tyson Lawton, among them. Off the top of my head, pretty much the entire offensive line is going to be gone. Mikhail Kamara might declare for the NFL draft. Aiden Fisher might, but he'll probably come back. I think Jalen Walker is gone. You got a lot of players to replace for Indiana, and they've been very busy recruiting through the portal right now. I know they got a running back from UAB, but there hasn't been a lot of noise. Elijah Green entered the portal, Indiana's third-string running back. Fourth string. He had that kind of patented late-game garbage time touchdown thing going. He's in the portal. Donovan McCulley commits to Michigan. No surprise. He can go play for Sharon Moore and have a quarterback who can't get him the ball. Sure, let's go with that. Maybe he'll play with Bryce Underwood. Who knows? But anyway. Indiana, Iowa City, Eugene, State College, College Park, Maryland, and West Lafayette, their road games next year. Tough. And we'll find out how Indiana handles those environments, because they only played in one environment like that this year, and that was in Ohio State at the Shoe. Did not go well. But that is well down the road. What we're looking at right now, of course, is the college football playoff, Indiana and Notre Dame. I do wonder how much of the stands will be filled up by Indiana fans. Because Indiana's obviously got a big alumni base around the country, but especially in Chicago, and it's not exactly a far trip from Indy to South Bend. Very boring drive, though. I did that drive when I visited Notre Dame. It is very boring, as is the drive from Lincoln back to Bloomington. But Indiana to South Bend for the first round of the college football playoff. There might be some red. It seems like every time Notre Dame plays a big game at home, that opposing fans somehow find their way in. Nothing compared to what Tennessee fans are trying to do at Ohio State, though. Somebody from Ohio State, a season ticket holder, I think it was, maybe leaked the ticket presale code to Tennessee fans. So the Vols are trying to checker the shoe with orange and white. That would be really funny. Between Tennessee fans potentially invading Columbus, Ohio, and Ryan Day maybe getting booed by Ohio State fans because they lost to Michigan. Michigan going 7-5, but beating Ohio State. That's a successful season for them, especially considering where they were at the start of the year. Ohio State might be in for some trouble when they face Tennessee. That's going to be a really fun game to watch. All of the college football playoff first-round games will be fun. Indiana's got the first one on Friday. And I'm so excited to see that game and how it plays out. The winner getting Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Georgia without Carson Beck, who you could argue holds them back, but Gunnar Stockton is not better than Carson Beck. And I think whoever wins out of Indiana and Notre Dame has a really good chance of going to the Orange Bowl. The college football playoff semifinal. Going to be really fun. We will talk more Indiana sports on the other side of this break. I'm Nick Rodecap. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, as we approach finals week here in Bloomington, IU Sports sort of take a hiatus for about a week. That is what happens when you've got big exams coming up, I suppose. But one more team in action today, and that is Indiana women's basketball. Indiana women's basketball currently 7-3 on the season. A really tough win over Penn State in their Big Ten opener last Saturday, 75-60 in State College, which was a game that Indiana really needed to get right because they've kind of had an up-and-down start to this season. Of course, their first one in a long time without Mackenzie Holmes or Sarah Scalia, and some interesting games on the resume for Indiana women's basketball. You think back to the loss against Harvard, their first home loss in 2 years. Then they followed that up with a dud at Butler. And then, of course, the 30-point loss in the championship game in the Bahamas in the battle for Atlantis. Squeaked out a win against Southern Indiana. And then Penn State, really, Indiana looked great in that game. The big storyline from that one was Caroline Strickland coming off the bench, 27 points on a perfect 12 of 12 shooting in 22 minutes for Indiana women's basketball. That was something that Indiana, I think, is going to need more of, some production coming off the bench, because Indiana doesn't usually go very deep into their bench, but now I think they kind of have to a little bit. So you'll hopefully see more of that from Strickland in the future. Strickland came over from Tennessee, kind of that backup post player behind Lily Meister. We'll see how they handle the minutes between those two going forward. But Indiana playing Bellarmine today at 2 p.m. That game is on Big Ten Plus and on B97 radio in Bloomington. We look at Bellarmine women's basketball. They're coming in at 9-2 this season. They actually have already played a Big Ten team. They went up to Purdue and lost by 11 up there in West Lafayette. Bellarmine coming in. Indiana, it is one of their final non-conference games. Indiana will play another one against Oakland next Sunday. That's at noon. I'll be on the call for that one on Big Ten Plus. Nick Rodecap with you here on IU Sports Sunday. It's going to be fun to see how Indiana really handles Big Ten play, the bulk of it. They go to Iowa City again. I mean, that rivalry really blossomed with Caitlin Clark with the Hawkeyes, but she's gone now, obviously. Iowa predictably taking a little step back, as will happen when you lose the greatest player to ever come through your program. That does tend to happen. But Indiana taking on Bellarmine at 2 o'clock today, and then they'll play Oakland next Sunday before diving into conference play in earnest. And you look at what Indiana women's basketball has done so far this season. You'd like to see them, I think, shoot a little bit better from outside. But again, you lose Sarah Scalia. That's what Sarah Scalia was great at, was shooting the three ball. But she graduated, so you've got to kind of fill in that production where you can. But you look at what Indiana has this season. Yarden Garzone predictably taking a bulk of the minutes for Indiana, and she's kind of found her rhythm again. I wouldn't say she slumped last year, but she definitely did not perform to the same level that she did her freshman season. But Garzone shooting 38% from three, 39% from the floor. Of course, she takes a bulk of those shots from outside. A perfect 24 of 24 from the free throw line, which is impressive. No matter how you slice it. Shea Chesky coming over from Penn State, having just played against her former team. Chesky, whenever she played against Indiana, that was kind of her thing, was knocking down threes from outside, especially when she played in Assembly Hall here last year. But Chesky, 36% from three, 40% from the floor, 92% from the line. So you look at those numbers, you look at the minutes she's playing, both she and Garzone playing about 35 minutes per game. So they rarely get a breather. But Chesky, has been cooking from outside, which is what Indiana needed. Again, Sarah Scalia was kind of that kind of player over the last couple of years, but Chesky coming in has filled that role nicely. And then you've got, of course, Chloe Moore McNeil, the facilitator. She decided to come back for one final season. And, I think it's going to be really, really intriguing to see how Indiana replaces her next year. Because Moore McNeil, again, another one of those players playing over 35 minutes a game, shooting 40% from the field, 37% from three. So I do wonder what that looks like for Indiana going forward. Again, against Bellarmine and Oakland, some of these lesser teams, you're not really gonna see that. You're not going to see the starters play a lot of those minutes. But I do think if Indiana is able to get healthy, obviously Lexus Vargas are just coming back from injury, and Lene Beaumont still out, I believe, has not played this season. Once they get healthy, you'll see some of that depth come back into play. And from there, Indiana can get hot. I think under Terry Morin, they had that really rocky start, but it's a lot of new faces coming together and playing together for the first time. And Indiana needed to figure it out. And I think now they have. They've had some time off after that Penn State game, and you'd like to see them handle business against Bellarmine and Oakland and then go into Big Ten play and start to heat up again, because all you need is a chance. And, those rocky games early in the season, you can clean that up, and Indiana women's basketball has shown signs of that. And the men's team, on the other hand, has not. And that's why I think there are some you could draw some parallels between Indiana women's basketball and men's basketball when it comes to kind of the rocky early season start. The difference is the women's team has started to figure it out, and they went on the road and they actually won. So you could come at me and say like, oh well, it's kind of the same thing where Indiana women's basketball is underperforming, but they figured it out and they put together a complete game on the road. Indiana men's basketball has not done that. And that's where the differences lie, I would say. Men's basketball, just I remember I had one of my friends ask me about, do you like Indiana against Nebraska? He texted me the morning of the game, and I said no, because it's on the road, and I feel like I've seen this movie enough to know that Indiana loses this game by 15. They ended up losing the game by 17. It's just so predictable at this point. That's not exactly me being like Nostradamus or like predicting like, I don't know, the exact score of the Super Bowl or something. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that Indiana men's basketball sucks on the road under Mike Woodson. It's crazy to me that, Indiana could have gone out and gotten Dusty May. They could have. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? But they didn't. They brought Woodson back. They gave him all the money in the world. They spent, like $5 million on this roster. And it's so far, 11 games in, the early returns are not good. And I do wonder there's some people talking about, Quinn Buckner has a chokehold on the program because he's the president of the board of trustees. And, he could send Scott Dolson packing whenever he wants to. And that's why Dolson hasn't fired Woodson. I don't know how much validity there is to that. There's certainly an argument to be made that because Quinn Buckner, has the control over the Board of Trustees, that he might be the one pulling the strings and he wants to keep Woodson in. But, man, I feel like if we saw it with football last year. There was that picture that student media member Mason Williams took of the student section about 20 minutes prior to kickoff on senior day when Indiana played Michigan State last year. The student section was basically empty. The entire stadium was basically empty. And I feel like it's not going to get to that level with Indiana basketball, but you definitely will probably see some fans starting to speak with their wallets if you haven't seen that already. For example, the attendance at the, either the Sam Houston State game, even the Minnesota game was not great. You're going to start to see that, I think, with Indiana men's basketball if the results stay the way they are away from home. Indiana's problem is not at home. They can win at home. That's not the issue. It's when they leave Bloomington that they just completely fall apart and they can never put together a full game. But, we will see. We will see where that goes in the future. Only time will tell. But, again, early returns not encouraging. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Here on IU Sports Sunday, wrapping things up here on the final Sunday of the semester in Bloomington. I'm thinking about the parallels, or I guess the difference, not the parallels, between Indiana football and basketball. Aside from this being an apples to mashed potatoes comparison, I think it's a testament to the power of good coaching, what Curt Cignetti has done for Indiana football. Because, all the SEC, folks have said things about how Indiana doesn't have any 5-star recruits, and therefore Indiana sucks. What? I don't know, but that's been thrown out throughout the season. Even comparing Indiana to teams like Ohio State and Michigan. They didn't have any good recruits, so they're obviously not that good. Curtis Rourke, if you look up his 24/7 sports page, I don't even think he has a picture on there. He's listed as, I believe, being from Ontario, Canada. He's from Oakville, Ontario. But it's not about the recruiting stars. It's not about the amount of blue chip prospects you have in your program. It's about what you do with the players you do have. It's about how you coach them up. It's about how you fit them into a system. Curt Cignetti has preached that from day one. Talking about the idea that you don't put any limitations on yourself. No self-imposed limitations. You put the right things in the heads of the people around you, and you put those people in the right places. Anything is possible. And he's proven that. He talked a lot. He lit a fire under this fan base. He lit a fire under these players, those of whom stayed from the Tom Allen coaching staff to this one, those of whom came in from schools like James Madison. He put all the right things in their heads, and he put Indiana in the college football playoff, and he won National Coach of the Year along the way. Not exactly with a list of household names, star players, consensus 5-star recruits. He didn't need that. But he still got it done. And I think that's a testament to not just Curt Cignetti and his ability as a head coach and as a leader, but the people around him as well. And obviously one of those people, Tino Sunseri, the quarterback's coach, will be going to UCLA as their offensive coordinator, which is a big step up for him. I think that's a sign of a successful program. I think if you have other teams, other programs looking at you and looking at your coaching staff and trying to hire them away, that's a sign that you're doing something right. I think that just comes with the territory, and I think that Curt Cignetti in Indiana will be fine without Tino Sunseri. I do selfishly hope that Tino comes back as the head coach after Cignetti retires. That would be really cool to see. But on the other side, you've got Indiana basketball. Kind of the inverse of Indiana football. And I know this is kind of a wild comparison because it's two completely different things, right? But the idea is kind of the same. Indiana football, not a lot of talent. They get a lot of results because of the coaching staff. Not a lot of talent, as in not a lot of players that were looked upon highly coming out of high school, I guess I should say. Obviously, the players are very talented, and I'm not trying to take anything away from them. But the coaching staff is playing a huge role in their success because all these players are being put in the right position. On the other side, you have Indiana men's basketball. A lot of talent, I say, when it comes to players looked upon favorably by recruiters coming out of high school, even looked upon favorably as it relates to the professional ranks, players like Mackenzie Mbako, Malik Renew, Miles Rice, etc. Umar Ballo, a big name. I mean, maybe not a household name, but a bigger name in the college basketball landscape. And yet you look at what they've done, and it's not good. You look at, again, Indiana, Mike Woodson's second year. He had Trace Jackson Davis, Jalen Hood-Schifino. I wish Jalen Hood-Schifino would have stayed for one more season, considering how his pro career has kind of, flatlined in South Bay with the Lakers G League affiliate. But Indiana has all the talent in the world on the hardwood. Obvious talent this year. Maybe they didn't last year, but even still, Khalil Ware got drafted by the Miami Heat, and he was really one of Indiana's only bright spots last season. Indiana has all the talent, but not the coaching when it comes to basketball. And I think that is becoming more and more apparent by the day. Again, if Indiana, say, turns it around and somehow finishes top 3 in the Big Ten and makes the NCAA tournament and gets to the Sweet 16, great, but I don't see that happening. I really don't see that happening. And Indiana is actually faring worse right now than Rhode Island is. Rhode Island, of course, coached by former Indiana head coach Archie Miller. I don't know if anybody is going to be calling for Archie to come back, but I have seen people calling for Tom Crean to come back. Which, wow. That's how bad it's getting for Indiana men's basketball. And I'm not trying to be a doomer here. I'm just trying to put this into perspective. Look at what former players associated with Indiana are doing at other schools. Tamar Bates, 26 points to knock off Kansas. CJ Gunn, 20 points off the bench. Caleb Banks, 33 and 16 last night for Tulane. Shooting 40% from three on the season is Caleb Banks at Tulane. These guys are all flourishing somewhere else. Maybe the fit wasn't right. I understand that that's possible. But the lowest common denominator is Mike Woodson. And it's unfortunate because, again, he's got a phenomenal legacy as a player. One of the greatest players in Indiana men's basketball history. As a coach, though, no. I really do think there's a very good chance he could be gone at the end of this season, but we'll have to leave it there. As for coming up here on WGCL, the Indianapolis Colts and the Denver Broncos, a game with playoff implications. 4:25 kickoff from Denver. Matt Taylor, Rick Venturi will have you covered right here. Coverage begins at 3 p.m. Eastern. And then Sunday Night Football, Kansas City and the Chargers later on tonight. I'm Nick Rodecap. You've been listening to IU Sports Sunday. Have a good rest of your Sunday afternoon and evening. We'll see you in South Bend on Friday night for the College Football Playoff.